All right. Well, welcome everybody to our event. I am excited to see so many people, and I'm sure some more will keep popping in over the next few minutes. But we're going to go ahead and get started because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So welcome to our Career Connection event, Careers in Management Consulting. The goal of today's event is really to connect you students with some professionals in the field of management consulting. And especially for those of you that maybe aren't very familiar with the field, we want this to be an opportunity for you to learn more about consulting from those that work in the field and just have the opportunity to network. So to get things started, we're going to introduce all of our guests today because we have quite a few. So we're going to start with our industry professionals. So when I introduce you, if you would just like to say hello and maybe where you work with, and we're going to get into some other things here in a few minutes, but just, your name and where you work with now. So we're going to start with Jon Alles. How are you doing today, Jon?
Hey, sorry, everybody. Let me put my video on. I might have to close in and out. Good, doing well. Good to see everybody. Just introducing ourselves, Randy?
Yeah, at this point, sure.
Sure. Hey, I graduated in 2020 from Fisher, majored in operations and logistics. Started at BCG August 2020, so I've been here about 7 months. Been on 3 different cases so far, about to start my 4th one on Monday. So yeah, I can speak to a breadth of experiences there. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Perfect. Thanks, Jon. And then next we have Anand Shah.
Yeah, hey everybody. So I think unlike the rest of the panel, I'm still currently here at Ohio State. So I had interned at McKinsey and Company this previous summer, and then I will be going back full time in the fall. And so I have worked on just one project at the moment. So I'm a senior here studying biomedical science with minor in economics and real estate.
Perfect, thanks. Next we're gonna go with Rooney Mantena.
Sure. Hi, guys. My name is Rooney. I graduated Ohio State last spring with a degree in marketing, minor in writing. I interned for Accenture my junior year at Ohio State and came back full-time last August. I currently sit within Accenture Development Partnerships, which is an organization within broader Accenture. On my 4th project now, so can speak to any of the above.
Perfect, thanks. Next, Sarah Schaefer.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Schaefer. I graduated from Ohio State in May 2016 with a degree in industrial and systems engineering. Been with EY since October 2016, so about 4.5 years now. So have a breadth, some different experiences. I've been local, I've traveled back when that was a thing, so can speak to kind of all that kind of stuff. And I've been on 4 different projects in my time, so a little longer term, sounds like a little different than some of the other experiences we've had. So excited to talk with you all.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And then lastly, Vamsi, and I'm not even gonna pronounce your last name because I don't want to butcher that and embarrass myself for you.
Thank you, Randy. Yep, it's Vamsi Chodisetty, and I graduated back in May 2020 as well. Majored in economics and neuroscience, and I've been on like 3 to 4 projects, but our firm's a little bit different, so we have like ongoing projects as well.
Perfect, thanks. So we also have with us today 3 representatives from student organizations that focus specifically on consulting. So we're really excited about that as well. So I want to let them introduce themselves too. Let's start with Lauren.
Hey guys, I'm Lauren. I'm a senior at Ohio State studying finance and Spanish. I'm the representative for CA, which is Consulting Academy. So kind of just teaching lessons on kind of how to get into consulting every semester, and every Wednesday night on Zoom. If you guys are interested, message me and I'll get you that link.
Perfect, thanks, Lauren. Jordan, you want to go next?
Hello, everybody. My name's Jordan. I'm a senior. I study industrial systems engineering. I'm the representative for IISC consulting team, and we specifically try to get industrial engineers into the field of consulting.
And then finally, Richie.
Hey, everybody. My name's Richie Wainio. I am representing students consulting for nonprofit organizations, or SC&O. And in that organization, we work on projects with local Columbus nonprofits to try to just improve their situation in a variety of ways. And it's open to all students if anyone would be interested in joining.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. And for those on the call, the students that are joining us today, what we're going to do is we're going to start with some guided Q&A. We prepared some questions ahead of time for our panelists. And then we're going to have a few minutes for open Q&A. So be thinking now about questions that you would like to ask our panelists. And we'll let you know when we're ready for that. You can either unmute yourself or drop a question in the chat, and we'll make sure to grab it. And then after that, we're going to do some networking as well. So you'll have a chance to network with our professionals in the breakout rooms here within Zoom. So I'm going to start with the first question for our professionals for our panel. So if you could just tell us a little about your background, and then maybe even more importantly or specifically, what led you to a career in consulting?
Who should go first, Randy?
Sure.
Okay, I'll go first. All right, my background. Not super relevant. I would say I think backgrounds in consulting, like there's a wide variety. But I will say that I came from a business background, so I majored in operational logistics, and really the impetus behind deciding to recruit for consulting was that I did an internship my sophomore summer in standard industry, large company, right, working in supply chain, and I wasn't too enthused by the work that was given to me. You're kind of delegated down and you're given responsibilities. To be fair, I'm painting a grim picture because I have a bias towards consulting, but that was my experience in industry. So then I decided I wanted to experience the variety and challenges that come from consulting. So that was the main reason that I pursued that. So I was initially interested in supply chain consulting, stuff like that, but ended up settling on the more generalist model that BCG provides, where I get that variety. So I had mentioned that I've been on 3 projects, going on my 4th already, that spanned from industrial goods to a massive multi-million-dollar turnaround of this company, to now I'm going on to a healthcare client, working on some transformation services, kind of teeing up where they should go in the next few years. They're trying to grow super fast. So, huge jump in the work that I do day to day, which is kind of the exciting portion. That's what I wanted out of a career. I'll pass off to Rooney.
Sure. Thanks, John. So I mentioned I currently work within Accenture Development Partnerships. I guess to understand why I chose consulting, it's helpful to provide some context on my current role. So Accenture Development Partnerships is basically a focused organization within Accenture that focuses on international development consulting in the social impact sector. And I think throughout college, I kind of had my foot a little bit in 2 different areas. On one hand, I was really interested in consulting. I joined Buck my freshman year, which sadly don't see any representatives from there here. But I was also really interested in kind of social impact and education. I'd done a lot with student teaching in high school and had done some education internships in college. So was kind of looking for a post-grad career that would combine the things I really loved about consulting, working in teams, getting to learn new things every day, getting to solve really big problems, with simultaneously making sure that the problems I was solving and the work I was doing was meaningful. So I really enjoyed my internship with Accenture my junior year. I focused on the health and public services industry and kind of wanted to spin that off into what I wanted to do full time, which led me to my current role. And I'll pass it off to Vamsi.
Yeah, I would say my path into consulting was a little bit atypical. Throughout college, I was really invested in just doing research, and I was in Buck through college as well. So I had some economics background while also majoring in economics. And I was just really interested with how health systems worked. So I had a deep passion for learning more about the healthcare industry as a whole. And there's not a better role than consulting that can show you all the different ways that health systems think and act, and will then implement processes. So in my current role, really, really excited to work with health systems to see how they can implement new revenue models within value-based care, which is a revenue model that is different than the current fee-for-service model, as they'll call it. I can pass to Anand unless we want to move to a next question, right?
No, I think we'd like to hear from everybody, at least for the first couple of questions.
Perfect. Yeah, so thank you, Vamsi. And yeah, so as many others had mentioned, so I came into undergrad thinking that, I was just going to be a traditional pre-med, so go through 4 years, do pretty heavy science related coursework and do research, as, Vamsi had kind of mentioned. So clearly studying biomedical science, that was always the pathway. I kind of gained like a greater appreciation for healthcare administration when I was a freshman, just through other experiences that I had had. And so I also joined Buck my freshman year. And after joining Buck, and it's actually funny, there isn't somebody from Buck on the panel, but I guess through the past 4 of us, we've all been in Buck. So I guess we subtly have that little bit of representation. But yeah, so with that, with other mentors in Buck, I had kind of been pushed into thinking about, a life in consulting and what that would look like. I knew I wanted to go into healthcare administration. So that was kind of my mindset in regards to why consulting, was really to get some specialized knowledge in a specific space. Being pre-med, I didn't have any business background, have never taken a class within Fisher. So I was kind of thinking, how do I get some of that exposure without necessarily having to devote specific coursework time to that. So that's kind of where I found myself, applying to the McKinsey internship before junior year. I went through that process, worked this past summer on Medicaid. And so it was really interesting because I think a lot of my experience has been, seeing how I could take a lot of my science background and re-implement that into an internship and onto a project dealing with the real life application of services that relate to the healthcare industry. So that's kind of where I see my future going too. I don't plan on staying within consulting. My pathway is much more kind of driven in staying in consulting for the next 2 years, working at McKinsey and Company, and then moving myself more towards back to medical school. So interesting kind of pathway, I guess, there, but yeah, has been great so far. And I don't remember who the last person is, if there's another person. Oh, Sarah. Yes, it was Sarah.
Yep. So like I mentioned, I majored in industrial and systems engineering. I kind of always thought I was going to go the more traditional manufacturing, work in a plant route. I did an internship in a plant in between my junior and senior year, and I realized that was not the path for me. So, went into my senior year, was like, okay, crap, what do I do now? Started my senior capstone project, which was actually a Lean Six Sigma Greenbelt project. I was working with a local company in Columbus. I was with Donato's Pizza. And I liked being kind of that fresh set of eyes from the outside, helping them through this thing that they wanted to do. So I really liked that. The other thing with consulting that was appealing to me at the time was, like I mentioned, I was like, okay, I don't like manufacturing. What do I want to do? And consulting kind of gave me a little bit more runway to figure that out, because at least with EY, you don't start aligned to a specific practice. You start, it's our tech consulting program. So basically you get to try out different projects and kind of see where you fit and where you align. So it gave me a little bit more runway to figure out what I wanted to do. And you get to learn a lot really, really fast. So like I said, I've only been on 4 projects in 4.5 years, and I've just been on longer projects, but even just looking back at just how much I've learned, even within the last 2 years, it's insane, like the amount of growth and opportunity that starting your career in consulting offers. So that's kind of why I landed and why I've stayed for almost 5 years now.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm always so interested to hear what people's backgrounds are with a question like that. So the second question that I have, and not everybody has to answer this panelist wise, but you're more than welcome to if you have thoughts. So if I were to walk up to you on the street and basically just say, tell me what a consultant does, how would you answer that? What would you tell me? Because I know this is a question that we get often. I work in arts and sciences at OSU, and it's especially a question that we get from our students in arts and sciences. So how would you answer that?
I would say that when you're asking what a consultant does, you need to make sure you know what kind of consulting they do first, right? So the response is going to vary drastically by where they're aligned. So I will speak to the 2 kinds of consulting that I've experienced. I did a summer in tech consulting, and now I am in management consulting. So my summer in tech consulting, what I did was working on a massive 3-year-long ERP implementation. ERP is like the backbone of a company. So if you think about all their processes in the cloud, payroll to warehousing, et cetera, that's what ERP is. and companies are all different, so they need to hire a consulting firm to help them implement that. That's what I did in tech consulting. And so, yeah, my day-to-day was working a lot with the offshore team on like what the design requirements were, getting ready for the change in management aspect. I wasn't a huge fan of that, to be honest. It wasn't for me. And the reason being is that, one, I wanted more short-term projects. I wanted the variety. And two, I felt, again, like I was kind of boxed into one area. Like, for example, my area was just on one module of Microsoft Dynamics. So now what I do in management consulting is pretty different. And it really varies by project, and everyone will say this. So I'll just give you an example of what I'll be doing starting Monday. So starting Monday, I'll be on a 10-week analysis of a massive company, like a massive healthcare medical supplier company. And so what we're looking to do is we're splitting the work across 4 different modules. So top line growth, like how do we grow their sales? Then also, how do we reorganize how they work? Like basically, are they organized efficiently to capture the value that they need, which is what I'll be working on. Another group of people will be working on the processes, looking at what complexities are there and finding synergies to reduce cost. And so all this was trying to get to, basically this company has, in like less than 6 weeks, they have to submit their budget, and they want to save like $50 million in SG&A by that point. And so they're asking us, can we do that or not? And how much savings can we capture over the next 2 years? And so we're kind of teeing that up. And once we have all that, like once we have that roadmap planned out, then we actually pass it off to a different consulting firm that does the implementation work, which is what I was doing last summer. So you can kind of see how those two play together, because you got to make the decisions first before you actually go and implement them. So I said that really fast because I don't want to go into all the intricacies, but that's essentially what the change in work was between the 2 experiences in consulting I did. So consulting is a pretty broad term. So you just got to be careful about asking, like, like what does consultants do? Because it really depends on what their role is. I'll mute and let anyone else take on this question if they'd like.
Yeah, I think I really appreciated, John, your description. I think the thing that I would just add to kind of what John had said, and this is from some, I haven't really been, as many months as some of the other people on this call, but I think from my experiences and when I've asked, actual, people at the firm, what they would, describe consulting as is, I think a lot of times consultants are typically experts in a specific area, and that's kind of where John is getting at with the different subspecialties within consulting. And so I think what's really interesting about it is, when you ask what does a consultant do, typically it's a company bringing in a group of individuals who are highly skilled in fixing a specific type of problem. So it's not necessarily a problem that internally they couldn't solve, but rather a problem that maybe they don't want to devote the time or resources to fix in the first place. And so I think that's kind of where consultants come in, where, for example, in Vamsi's case, if they're looking at, price structures within a healthcare system, it's not that the individuals within that, higher executive team don't know how to do it. It's more so that they know that by bringing in a specific team to do it, outside of their current management, they can do it quicker, more efficiently, and spend less dollars than they would have to do to, formulate that team internally. And so I think that's kind of where, as John said, really depends on whether or not you're working, public, private, whether or not it's retail or healthcare. But all in all, I would say it's very similar to just, I've heard the basic definition of consulting being, like your doctors for companies. And I think that's pretty accurate in a lot of senses, where you're bringing in a group of individuals to look at the problem, diagnose what's wrong, and tell you how to fix it. Not to say you couldn't fix it yourself, but you're bringing in somebody who has maybe more expertise or has done and worked on that problem time and time and again. And I think, last kind of addition there is I worked on Medicaid this past summer. And there's multiple different types. There's multiple Medicaid companies throughout the United States. So the engagement manager that I had, it was actually a 6th project doing Medicaid type work. So by the time he was brought in to do this transformation, it was super simple. He knew everything that needed to get done. So it's that type of, I think, rationale there.
I'm going to springboard off of both of John and Anad's answers and say the broad answer for what a consultant does is we solve problems. Like Anad mentioned too, if a company's hiring a consulting firm to come in and do something, it's because they can't or don't want to do it themselves. A lot of times it's because the problem's complex and they don't have the resources, whether that be the talent, the number of people, whatever. They don't have the resources to do it themselves. So I think the general answer, no matter what you're doing within consulting, is you're solving problems, whether it's more of the management consulting up front, figuring out, okay, what's the problem, where's the gaps, and what's the roadmap to move forward. Or for me specifically, I'm in tech consulting. Even within that, we're still solving problems. Okay, how do we get this system to work the way we want it to? Even if you're developing, it's okay, the BA gave me trash requirements, how do we fix this, type of thing. So I think that's kind of if someone were to ask me on the street, what does a consultant do? I think my generic answer is we solve problems. I like Doctor for Companies, I've heard that one, that's a good one too. But that's kind of the generic answer I would give.
Awesome. I think those are some good answers for sure. We'll move forward to question 3 now. And so my question is, how do you think your job will be different after COVID compared to how it was before COVID ever existed? So I know your job is obviously very different right now without travel, but how do you think that will continue or go back to how it was in the future?
I can start with that one. So like I mentioned, pre-COVID, I had been on traveling projects. I was also on local projects, and it's going to differ between what type of project you're on. But pre-COVID, if you were traveling to a client, it's typically Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday. You're on the client site. So Monday you hop on a plane, go into the office, and then either Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, maybe sometime Friday, you're taking a flight home. And then you turn around and do that again the next week. Or if I was on a local project, I was in the client office Monday through Friday. I didn't go to the UI office for like months and months at a time. Post-COVID, I've heard this from a couple other people like within the firm that this is what they expect, that they don't think it'll be the full, for us it's typically Monday through Thursday every week. If you're traveling, I think it'll be more when you're starting the project to build those relationships. You might be on the ground every week, every day, but that probably won't last for the entirety of the project. Once that relationship's built and solid, we've proven that we can do it remote. It's better on us as consultants. We're not burnt out from traveling, and it's cheaper for the clients because they're the ones paying for us to travel. So I don't think it's going to be as travel on-site heavy post-COVID, just because, like I mentioned, it benefits us, it benefits the client. They're not paying for it.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
And it benefits both sides. It's cheaper, it doesn't wear us out. So it's, I think, still TBD, but I think it's going to be a lot more remote. And like I said, we've proven for the last year that we're capable of it, we can do it. I know personally my project has still been full speed ahead. We never missed a beat. So I think you're going to see a lot more of a mix of remote and in person. I don't think it's going to be, at least in consulting, probably not full one way or the other, but I think you'll see more of a mix.
I agree with Sarah, and I'll say this. I know a lot of people on this call probably want to travel, and work from home blows, in my opinion. It's not fun. So let me provide you BCG's perspective. I'm only going to speak to BCG. It might be different for other firms and other practices. One, I think what Sarah said is correct in some capacity for us. It'll be more hybrid, meaning you have more options to stay at home if you'd like. But, and this is, we actually had a call on this last week, Tuesday, on like what the future of work will look like. There is still going to be a lot of travel for the work that we do, especially because when clients are paying for our fees, right? First of all, travel is a very small percentage of what they're actually paying. And so when you're asking, a firm to come and say, hey, what do we do for this $200 million investment? They don't mind spending $400 to fly you out, because if they can get the best guys in the room, or best girls, sorry, if they can get the best people in the room, then they're going to pay for them to be in that room. And it's an antiquated model, admittedly, but there's also a lot of benefits to having people in the room and whiteboarding together. And you can't replicate that as well over Zoom. So the way our firm is approaching it is that we are starting to go back to the office over the summer. I know the interns will be expected to be in the office. Travel will come back. However, I think we're kind of getting the best of both worlds, where it's not going to be travel every single week, month in, month out. It'll most likely be travel 1 week, office the other, maybe 3 weeks out of the month you're traveling, 1 week out of the month you're in the office. Something like that is kind of what we've seen. But again, it probably varies a lot by how different firms are handling it. But I think rest assured for those like myself that like enjoy the idea of traveling, that it's still going to be there. It's not going to be all work from home for a lot of firms.
Yeah, that those all answers all make a ton of sense. If anybody else has anything else to add, I can go into the next question. Um, so why was consulting the right first job for you, and has the job surprised you in any way since you started?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think consulting was the right first job for me, mainly because I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly in what role or what ecosystem I wanted to fit in, as well as I didn't know the type of work style I really enjoyed. Being in consulting is, since you're just open to such a wide breadth of roles in terms of you interact with people at the analyst level as well as the C-level executive level, as well as you can just see a ton of different ecosystems, whether you're working for a health system, whether you're working for a payer, or in John's case, working for like just these really big corporations, you can get a view of so many different types of roles, which is why I think it's really unique, right? For people that don't know exactly what they want to do, they can get a really wide breadth of the fields themselves. And I think, when I think about what surprised me about the job, I think how willing people from every level of an organization are willing to listen to the advice that you have to provide. I'll get calls from clients all the time and say, hey, like, we need to make this executive decision. We have about like until the end of the day. Can you run a quick analysis to like tell us like what you think we should do? I'll tell them, and they won't ask like pretty much any other questions. So there's a lot of trust in that relationship, which I think surprised me a lot, because I'm 22 and this 55-year-old that's been in the field for 35 years is asking me a question. And I didn't really expect to be taken as seriously as I am, but I guess I am providing really concrete expertise in these areas.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. One, that the kinds of problems you get to solve so early on in your career. Like I can give an example for my current project. We're working on an immunization strategy for launching a vaccine in targeted low and middle income countries, right? Like my undergraduate degree was in marketing. I did not study medicine. I did not study international development or anything like that. And now this is the work I get to do on a day in, day out basis. And the spectrum of work I've gotten to do in my past 7 months in consulting, I think has really helped shape what it is I want to do. I don't know about all of you guys, but I loved school when I was in school. I loved college. So I was looking for something post-grad where I felt like I wasn't going to be stagnant, stuck in a 9 to 5. I mean, for consulting, right? Oftentimes it's past 9 to 5. You're spending 8, 12, 15 more hours working. So making sure the time and effort you're spending is meaningful was something that was really important to me. So I think consulting was great for all of that. What surprised me, I'll say, is how variable that is though too. As I mentioned, I've been on a couple of different projects, and like in full transparency, I hated my first project. It was working for a client that was like a large discount retailer, not something I was super excited about, working in change management. And my next project after that was working with like a large global refugee agency, which was something I was really interested and passionate about. So I think coming into consulting with an open mind and knowing that there's something to learn from each experience is kind of a good approach, and not being too taken aback by what one experience you might have that you might not like could lead to, because like the next thing you do could be amazing.
I think one last thing to add on. I can't really answer the first part of the question, given I'm still here at Ohio State, so I haven't really worked it. But the one thing, especially from this past summer, that I think really, shocked me was people's, willingness to help you get to where you want to go, in a sense. And so what I mean by that, I've only worked at one firm, but I think the thing about it was, I was very open while working this past summer about how I still want to go to medical school. And so I don't know, where your lives and the things that you all want to accomplish kind of are, but I think one of the things that shocked me about consulting is isn't necessarily an expectation that, you're going into consulting and you want to make your life out of consulting. I think those are two very independent things. And, for people who want to do that, phenomenal. But for people who don't, I think that's also, consulting still can be your path. And so I think that's kind of where, for me, it was, I talked to so many different people, and people are just so open to the fact that you can come to the firm, you can work here for a couple of years. And like, they're very, clear and cut about there are skills here that you will learn and that you will gain that are very transferable to everything else. And so they weren't, scared that, I might leave or that I might want to do something else, because to them, it was kind of like, you're going to take our brand and our name into any other walk of life that you enter. And so I think that's just something also interesting, where a lot of other companies and a lot of other fields, you go and work at P&G, there's a huge, push that you want to stay at P&G for the rest of your life. And they have like very good tracks to be able to do that. But for consulting, some people stay and become partners, but tons of people leave. So it's just like another interesting part that I had never really realized until speaking to people about it.
Yeah, I'm just going to build on that because I agree on it. I wasn't surprised that people stay for a short period of time. I had known that, but what I didn't know until I actually received my offer, so I'd fully committed the whole consulting thing, is not just that people stay for a short period of time, but they enable that. And what I mean by that is, at least at BCG, it's very open when it's time for you to leave. You can engage that conversation when you want. The average tenure is less than 2 years. So people stay for that first promotion, then generally leave out. So it's rare to stay longer than 2 years, is a fair statement to make. And when you want to leave, we offer services to help you find a new job. So there's an internal portal for job postings, but also there's I think it's like 2 months of full salary or 4 months of half salary, where you can not be on a project. You're basically just free of responsibility. You've indicated that you want to leave, and they will help you. They'll pair you with someone to help you find a new job. And so it's the firm actually helping you find your next place. And Anand already mentioned the reason they do that is because then you will go to somewhere else and speak highly of BCG. And when you want to hire a consulting firm, you'll hire your alma mater, right? Because you have that bias. So it's a mutually beneficial thing. But I was surprised at how open they are about that, which I think is really cool, because most people don't stay in consulting for very long.
I'm going to jump in and say the thing that surprised me about consulting the most is that I've lasted almost 5 years. I thought I was going to hang out for like 2 years and then jump ship, and I'm still here. And I think it's just, it's because of the people I get to work with every day. In consulting, you're with the best and the brightest. Like someone else mentioned, like you're coming in, you're expected to be the expert on that topic, whether you are or not. But I think for me, that was the most surprising thing, is I thought I was going to make it to senior and bolt. But I'm still here at senior 3. So
If no one has anything else to add, we can move on to the next question. So how does your firm address recruiting consultants from various backgrounds, which include academic, racial, geographical, and how does this diversity improve the projects that your firm works on?
Maybe I'll start, because this morning we actually just had an office-wide discussion on our diversity report that we published maybe about a week ago. So we published out exactly where our consulting staff, their racial, gender breakdown, et cetera. We're very transparent about that to provide that accountability, because we sell to our clients, hey, you need to be diverse. So it wouldn't make sense if we ourselves were not diverse. So BCG is very good in that regard. I will say, when it comes to recruiting, so there's a sophomore program called Growing Future Leaders, GFL, I think, which is for diversity candidates. And then there's also Bridge to BCG, which is for juniors. That is another diversity opportunity. So there's 2 opportunities as an underclassman and an upperclassman to go through the diversity pipeline. So there's a lot of effort made in that regard. And I will say the internal discussion is like, there's a lot of discussion around this topic, and not just at the entry level, but also how that retains up the different ladders, right? Because a lot of firms will focus on the entry level diversity and then completely disregard the layers and upward mobility. And that's another main focus that I've seen on how we handle diversity. And then, yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Jon said, Accenture similarly is quite transparent with their DEI work. I remember that was actually one of the things that really appealed to me when I was kind of going through the consulting recruitment process. There's obviously the benchmarks and goals that many firms set. Things like, I think we have like a 60% increase in diverse hires by next 5 years. One big thing that our CEO, Julie Sweet, is an advocate of is 50-50 by 2025, which is kind of an initiative around having at least 50% of our global workforce be comprised of women in the next 4 years, which is crazy, a crazy ambitious goal given that Accenture is like 500,000 people worldwide. And especially, you know, in light of kind of the mass exodus of women from the workforce we've seen with COVID, these kind of initiatives are really important and I think very top of mind for everyone. What I think is also important to understand is diversity of backgrounds. I know we've all talked about kind of cross-functional teams and the varied work experience you get in consulting. And that really comes to play too when you're actually on the project, right? Like it's not just a shtick that people talk about. So in my current role, we have people on our team who were former doctors, former nurses, formerly C-suite pharmaceutical executives. And it's having that kind of deep insight and breadth of backgrounds that makes the learning part of the job really exciting and enables you to actually kind of deliver solutions that are fit for purpose, you know, not just the bad rep consulting gets of trying to pin a solution on a problem when the problem's not even really there. So I think thinking about diversity, both in terms of from kind of like a metrics perspective is important in terms of accountability, but also understanding how varied backgrounds, be it career or ethnic or gender, contribute to actually delivering value for clients is really important as well.
I'll just add on a little bit there. I think you both covered it really well, and kind of what EY is doing is very similar to what both of you mentioned. I know one thing EY has done within the last couple of years too is more so on the diverse background side is they don't have like the education requirements. So like, I don't think there's any like minimum education requirement or like, obviously there's specific majors when we're out recruiting that we target, but we'll look at anyone from any major. So let's say like, in terms of the education requirement, let's say like you have 20 years of experience, but you don't have a college degree. Historically, typically like, you won't get looked at by certain companies without that college degree. EY doesn't do that anymore. And again, we will take anyone from any major if you're qualified and passionate about consulting. So again, you know, you don't want 5 industrial engineers in a room all working on a project together, a consulting type project, because they're all trained to think the same way. I know my team is made up, it's, you know, we've got engineering background, we have finance, we've got, you know, people computer science. So it's all different people who are all, you know, you go through school and you learn how to solve problems, but the way I learned how to solve problems as an engineer is a little bit different than how someone with a finance degree learned how to think about and tackle a problem. So I think that's an important aspect of diversity to keep in mind as well.
Sarah, that was really the perfect segue to what I was going to ask next. This question was sent to me via the chat, and it was very similar to the topic that you were just talking about. So maybe from our other panelists, following up on what Sarah said, can you talk a little bit about, you know, if you think about your team and your organization, what is the array of backgrounds that they've come from in terms of majors? And, you know, how important really is that undergraduate major when it comes to hiring entry-level staff, knowing that on the call here today, we have students from Fisher College of Business, from the College of Arts and Sciences, and then also from the College of Engineering. So as Sarah just touched on, you know, there are a lot of different backgrounds. So for our other panelists, you know, what do those backgrounds look like at your organization?
Yeah, I can touch on kind of my experience from this past summer. So like I said, only been on one team, but kind of piggybacking off of what Sarah had just mentioned, I was really blown away by the diversity. So I think going into consulting, you know, I imagine that I would just be sitting in a room with anybody who, you know, would have been studying finance, accounting, you know, something along those lines. For me, then I joined my team. And so it was a 4-person team. One person had their MBA, one person had a JD, and another person had their PhD in biomedical engineering. So it was a huge spectrum of individuals that were sitting on my team. And then there's me, you know, a little undergrad studying biomedical science. But I guess my reason in kind of emphasizing that is, you know, I think especially when I was in the onboarding process, I had people from across the country who, you know, were in my little onboarding portal. It was just so eye-opening to me because I think one of the biggest things that, you know, consulting firms look at least in my experience, is not necessarily, you know, a specific major, background, et cetera. It's more an ability, in my eyes, to learn, to educate yourself, and to be able to, you know, solve problems effectively, quickly, and have like a certain amount of logic. I think for me, right, like I went through the interview process last year, and, you know, for myself, being biomedical science, and as I had mentioned, not going through any Fisher classes, I was kind of I was very, very nervous in regards to what is this interview process going to look like and what questions are they going to ask me to be able to get me to the next step. And so I remember I was sitting, and this is like the best story that I have from this interview to emphasize this point. I was sitting in one of these rooms with my interviewer, and we were talking about costs. And so he looks at me, he's like, do you actually know like what that type of cost is called? Something's probably seemingly very basic. I'm sure you learned that in Fisher 101. I'm sitting there, I have no idea what the answer to this is. So I just straight up look at him and I'm like, sir, like, I'm sorry, but biomedical science hasn't taught me that yet. And the dude just laughs, looks at me, he's like, you're completely right. Like, I apologize. He told me the answer to this question. And like, here I am, like sitting here, like a summer later. And like, the point is really that, I think it's not about knowing certain terms, at least from my perspective. It's not like, if you get into the world of consulting, it's more about, if I were to tell you that term now, could you remember that definition and apply it later? It's not like you have to come in with this preset of skills that, if you don't have them, it's not going to go your way. It's more, I think that, because I think, for example, for me, I used that term then throughout the rest of the interview and was able to kind of maneuver what the world was like, with some of the information that he was able to give me. And I think that kind of stems from any case that you'll do where there's going to be tons of equations and tons of things that you may never have seen before. But as long as you can, quickly adapt, I think that's what I've seen, at least, has been a very key step for a lot of people to kind of enter the world of consulting.
That's so spot on. And I will say, like, I won't repeat everything that's been said because I agree with it. I will say people get scared, or you'll see in the news about like, the state of New Jersey has hired McKinsey, hired a bunch of 22-year-olds to like advise them on vaccine rollout, which is such a misleading statement. They didn't hire 22-year-olds to advise them on vaccine rollout. They hired the managing directors and the partners, and the 22-year-olds, us, me, Anand, Rooney, et cetera, are doing the analyses and making sure that we use our skill set to find the right people. So I'm on a healthcare project. I didn't even understand what a deductible was before I started on this healthcare project. And basically what we have at our firm is expert networks. And so we, in our case, budget this out. And so I got on a call with a former C-suite executive from one of the competitors to our healthcare company and had a list of questions and asked like, okay, how does revenue cycle management work? And then she walked me through every step of the way. And so it's not about knowing anything about that itself. You just need to be able to apply your own skill set and knowledge and then adapt. And like Anand said, like pick up on those things and then not, and in front of the client, still kind of bring in like an air of knowledge and expertise, right? But you don't need to actually be the expert yourself. So yeah, that's a really good point.
That's great. I appreciate everyone's perspective on that, especially with the diversity of majors in the call here today. So we're going to shift a little bit at this point. That will end the guided Q&A portion of this event, but we do want to open it up for a few minutes in sort of this large room setting to anyone who has questions for our panelists, or even our student leaders that are on the call who mentioned the student organizations they're part of. So if you have a question for one of our panelists or one of our student organization representatives, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask, or you can also drop a question into the chat and I'm happy to monitor that.
Yeah, I have a quick question, and this isn't for any specific individual, but anyone that could answer it. Have any of you had projects that you've worked on and it ended up kind of not going the way that the client expected or didn't meet their needs or requirements? And kind of what's the protocol for that kind of situation?
So with consulting, at least the projects that I've been on, we work really closely with our clients. So if that was to happen, which I've had one project where it went that way, where the client just didn't really buy the way that we kind of envisioned them staffing their organization. And in working with them, we were able to kind of like pivot what our project goal was, like pivot our statement of work so that we can more accurately fit the needs of the client. Because this process isn't like, hey, like you go do this project, we come back in 2 months and we report out on what this project like outcome was. Like we'll have this iterative process where we'll have weekly touch bases with the client, give them updates, and then they'll say, okay, we didn't realize that this was part of the problem. How do we start tackling this? And we'll start like, as we enter new areas, all these new problems will arise that we just didn't predict, the client didn't predict, and they're not like necessarily like built into the statement of work. And sometimes like the project deliverable is like a lot different than what you imagine the project deliverable will be at the very beginning. So I think that's like always really important to think about like just consultant projects in general.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So it looks like that like all of you guys like did some kind of like it's like Buck when you guys were an undergraduate. And I was just curious. So for me personally, like I didn't really discover like consulting at all until like this year. I'm a junior right now. I don't really have that like consulting like Buck experience or anything like that. So I was just curious, like what advice would you give someone who I was originally planning on doing something in finance, but then I discovered a lot about consulting, and it's just really been interested in this field. So I was just wondering, like, what advice would you give for like an upperclassman who doesn't really have that much like experience and trying to get into the consulting role?
That's a fantastic question. And I think, for myself, especially coming from Buck, I definitely, I think I gained a lot in regards to some connections of people to speak with. But what I would say is I wasn't necessarily someone within Buck who was doing a project every single semester. And so for me, by the time I had gotten to senior year, I only been on, so one project that I had done was pretty good. The other project actually completely failed. Like our client just disappeared. And so it was, to me, like by the time I was a junior, to be very frank with you, I had never cased before. And so like I was very much in your shoes where like I didn't really know what consulting was. I was somebody who I wish I would have had this panel, frankly, because if you would have asked me at the beginning of junior year what consulting was, I would not have been able to give you an answer. And so I had phenomenal, people who walked me through the process. Somebody else, if anybody's familiar with Alex Ikazawa, phenomenal human being. Everybody, I'm sure all the guests know who that is. But he was somebody who like connected me and showed me the way in regards to, oh, here's the book to read. Here's the cases to work on. Here's this and that. And so what I would say to you in that regard is it really comes down to preparation. I think anybody would say that in regards to, getting from point A to point B. And I think in regards to that, it's making sure that you're very, practical in regards to making sure that you're improving. I think one of the big things that I would say for somebody starting off is, a lot of people say, do as many cases as you possibly can. I think that's a phenomenal piece of advice, but I would caveat that with saying you should only do as many cases as you can make sure that you're consistently growing from case to case, because I've seen people do one case at 3 and one case at 4. And then it's like, where are you actually implementing the growth? So if you started now as somebody who wants to get in consulting, I would say, I think 1, making connections is really great. I thought that was very useful for me. But 2, also really understanding where to allow your time, because, I think connections were great because I understood what the world was like. But for specific processes, at least how it is at McKinsey, was, knowing people wasn't necessarily the way to get into the door. It was more so, how do I make my resume look really good? How do I, have the hard skills to be able to get through that first round? And so those are kind of the insights that I use from not knowing anything about consulting when I was a junior to being kind of where I am now.
Yeah, Vincent and anyone else on the call, you should reach out to Lauren Nichols. Maybe Lauren, just like put your email in the chat or something. I wanted to mention Alex. So Alex and I, like in our senior year, we put together some slide decks on like what the consulting firms are, what the recruitment process looks like, all the prep you need to do, the timeline, what your resume should look like, that whole thing. It's all available on like Google Slides for Ohio State students. And Lauren and Allie are teaching that class live right now. And so it's not too late to join that. It's designed for you to join as needed. So reach out to Lauren if you're interested in doing that, because it's really hard to provide that answer on this limited time that we have, because it's a very long answer, and Anand summed it up pretty well, but there's a lot of details that you're going to want to get that come from those PowerPoints.
And I will say too, I was in a similar boat. I didn't know what consulting was until like probably junior year. I didn't even know it was an option for me. I had never heard of Buck until I started doing recruiting things. And like, honestly, when I go do recruiting things with Buck, like they scare me. Like they're intense, they're amazing, they are so smart. I'm like, man, these people are out there, and how did I get a job? Like I feel dumb sometimes in a room with them. So like, don't like get too hung up on that. I will say, like, I've done some recruiting and some help with interviewing and stuff like that. And I'll tell you the number one thing that we're looking for, and I think Jon alluded to it early in one of his other answers, is we don't expect you to be an expert coming in. We know that you don't know probably anything about most of the projects we're doing. what we're looking for is we're looking for people who have the ability and willingness to learn, and are like willing to learn, don't come in with an attitude like, oh yes, I'm the expert and I know everything. Like that's not going to get you very far in consulting. Realize that you don't know everything, but think of like, be open to learn, ask questions, and figure out how to solve the problem. And yeah, just practice, like case interviews, stuff like that. But like, we don't expect people fresh out of college to be an expert at consulting or anything by any means. So just, the best advice I can give is keep learning and be willing to learn. And just, we're looking for how you solve problems and how you interact with people, kind of at least through our interview process. So that's the best advice I can give. Don't get too hung up on, oh, I didn't know what consulting was until late in the game. I didn't either. And I'm here a consultant for 4.5 years. So.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Thank you, everyone.
I have a quick question. So I'm a sophomore right now and planning for recruiting for consulting internship potentially my junior year summer. How's that timeline usually look like, and what should I prepare along the way to have like a game plan-ish?
If you want to intern in consulting, say, okay, so right now, it's too late if you want to intern this summer in consulting for most of the big firms. So you'd be looking towards summer 2022. So right now, if you are a junior, that means when you come back to campus in the fall, you'll be a junior. So then you'll be recruiting for junior internships that summer. And if you're a junior right now, it means you'll be a senior. So you'll be recruiting for full time. What I suggest is, one, I'll tell you this, the timeline is generally in the fall. I had my interviews in September, October. Generally, when most people have them is September, October, sometimes in November. And then that's when you start getting all the offers, is in that first semester. Meaning that if you are pursuing firms that do case interviews, you want to prep for that over the summer. So, make your decision right now. I think this is a perfect time right now. It's March. Decide if consulting is for you. Decide if it's something you want to pursue, and then go all in. And so you would do that. I started prepping June, and then I interviewed in October. So I had probably like 5 months of prep beforehand. And of course you space it out. So it's not like you're prepping heads down every day super hard, but you space it out so you're not freaking yourself out. Some people start in August, September, right? And with varying levels of success, I always advise to start earlier just to give you that, that window of time, just in case you're not picking it up as fast as other people. But does that answer your question? The timeline starts pretty early for consulting. You recruit in the fall semester.
Yeah, I'm a sophomore now, so I'll prepare for my junior year internship starting this summer.
Correct.
Yep, similar answer. I know for EY, we don't recruit for consulting in the spring at all. We do actively recruit for consulting at Ohio State. Or sorry, we don't recruit in the spring. We do actively recruit in the fall. So our postings will open pretty soon, generally after you guys come back. Obviously, timelines are a little funky now with COVID and everything. And I'm sure they'll still be figuring out if we'll be actively on campus or if it'll still be remote. With all of that up in the air, timelines aren't super solid. The other piece of advice I can give is if you know you want to do consulting, firms are out there generally on campus. I know at least we are, especially in the fall. Just network with as many people as you can. Because like we're through the recruiting process, we're getting hundreds of people that we're talking to. But if you see the same person a couple times and that person becomes familiar, and then it just increases your chances of even getting an interview to even have that chance. So just network with as many people as you can, connect with firms, whether that be on campus, virtual events like this, whatnot. But that's kind of in addition to, prepping cases and stuff, just kind of network, meet with people. And that'll help prep you too, as you talk to people about, oh, what does your job look like in consulting, and what do you like, what do you not like about it. That helps prep you for interviews too, just so you're not like coming out of left field like, oh, this job sounded cool. Like you actually know what you're talking about because you've talked to people about what they do.
Yeah, having been through the process, I know Accenture, EY recruit on campus, and I know for a fact Accenture takes attendance. At least when I was recruiting, they take attendance. Deloitte takes attendance, and that factors into your likelihood of getting an interview. It's kind of annoying, but you should go to those events because it directly affects your chance of getting an interview. McKinsey has info sessions, which they take attendance. BCG, I don't know why we don't do it anymore. If we don't do it, So if you're interested in interviewing at BCG, then you should email me.
Well, I'm going to jump in here because I know a couple of our professionals have a hard stop at 4 o'clock.